Since Far From Home got released last year and I didn't do one of these videos, I like to stop and take the time to rank all three phases of the MCU. Hey everyone, S-Dub Nation here, and welcome back to a brand new Marvel video here on the channel. Please know that everything that I will say in this video is just my very own opinion. My list is certainly not the right list, it is just my list, and you are free to comment down below your ranking of all three phases ranked from the worst to the best. Without further ado, let's get into our ranking. Kicking off my list at number 3, we have Phase 1. Now this phase actually begins and ends with two great movies inside of the MCU. It begins with Iron Man, and then it also ends with the Avengers, which the Avengers is the first time that we see all of these characters come together. And actually Joss Whedon and Jon Favreau are the ones that kind of set the template, set the tone for the MCU going forward and what it has become to this day. But inside of the phase between Iron Man and the Avengers, the middle films are pretty wonky. The second film inside of this phase is Incredible Hulk, which is totally different from any other film inside of the MCU. There are less jokes, the color scheme seems a little bit wonky, Edward Norton obviously did not return, and Thunderbolt Ross is the only character from this film to make appearances later inside of the MCU. And I guess that's why a lot of people think that it's not inside of the MCU, even though it is. It just feels wildly different and odd. Next up we have Iron Man 2, which is a perfect depiction of too many ideas stirred into one pot. Obviously Jon Favreau wanted 3 years and Marvel only gave him 2 years, so you can actually see it inside of the script. What they wanted to do was they wanted to put this movie out by a certain release date, and they just ended up with a film that really didn't work that well. Obviously the cast is still great, it's a very enjoyable film, very fun film, but I just think that Incredible Hulk is better than this because we have so many ideas that work as their own standalone films but just do not work convoluted inside of one plot. And then we also have the fact that Marvel wanted to build a cinematic universe while also trying to tell a standalone story for Tony Stark. And when you have those two things, they just do not mix. It's clear what Marvel wanted to do. They wanted to put out this film by a certain release date, and they also wanted to tell this big gigantic world while also telling individual stories. Then we have Thor. I really like Thor. I think Kenneth Branagh was the best pick as a director for this film because it has that Shakespearean grandeur to it. And also they had a great set of actors, and they had an idea that they knew that these set of actors were great, that they could carry the franchise, but they just didn't fully figure out where they wanted to take these characters. And then we also have Chris Hemsworth, who wasn't very confident in the role as Thor. He really didn't have the bravado or the heroic or even the humor of Thor down pat as he does now. And then we also have Loki, which is not very prominent inside of the film as he is later in the MCU. This is a testament to Marvel Studios not knowing what they wanted to do with this cinematic universe yet. They knew that they were heading somewhere, but they didn't know how they were going to get there. Case in point, Captain America the First Avenger, which I think is a great origin story, but is actually limited by the fact that they wanted to have a great origin story, but you just can't have Captain America's origin story without World War II, and they wanted to put him in a place where he was going to show up in the Avengers next year. So what they did was they had a great first hour of his origin story, and then for the second hour, they just fast forward through the good stuff, the most important stuff about Captain America, World War II. They just flash forward that in montage, and then he ends up in the Avengers, which I just think that we could have gotten more of World War II, we could have gotten more, but I think that this was the best approach that they could have taken just to get Captain America inside of the Avengers. Because of this, we have a phase that tries to juggle a lot. How do we make these characters work? How do we take these characters out of their film franchises and put them inside a team-up film? How do we take a god from Asgard? How do we take a technical genius billionaire playboy? How do we take a gamma-rated super scientist? How do we take a super soldier from the 1940s and two super spies and put them inside of the same movie and have it work? That's mainly what this phase was about. It was about bringing these heroes together. It's essentially the starter pack, and while I have been pretty negative on it, there is a lot of entertainment value of seeing Asgard or seeing Tony Stark work on his armors. It's just something about the novelty of seeing this intricate plan have a great start, have a rocky road, and have a great ending. And this phase is the phase that you don't really have to watch all of the movies to understand the Avengers. You don't have to watch Incredible Hulk to understand Iron Man 2. You don't have to watch Iron Man 2 to understand Thor. Yes, we do have subtle hints to different films that come after the movie, such as in Iron Man 2, they found Thor's hammer. But we don't have to watch Iron Man 2 to understand Thor because we know that Thor's hammer ends up in New Mexico via the film. So I love the fact that we have these separate stories inside of the MCU that comes together inside of the Avengers, but each film inside of this phase can work on its own, and I think that that works perfectly fine as the starter pack. Rotten Tomatoes has their Phase 1 averaged out to 80.3, and I think the best two films inside of this phase has got to go to Iron Man and The Avengers. Our runner-up at number 2 has got to go to Phase 2, whereas Phase 1 bookended with The Avengers, and that film is actually regarded as the best film inside of that phase. The two middle films are regarded as the best in this phase, with Guardians of the Galaxy and Captain America the Winter Soldier. The phase starts off with Iron Man 3 and Thor the Dark World, which are regarded as some of the worst MCU movies, and then we also have Age of Ultron and Ant-Man in the later half of the phase. The best thing about this phase, but also its biggest weakness, is that they wanted to go bigger, they wanted to go better, and they wanted to take more risk. And yes, some of those risks paid off, but most of them didn't. Case in point, Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 was a film that left fans mainly frustrated with the Mandarin twist, which was a big bold risk, but it also subverted so many fans' expectations, which they purposely did that, and they just added in too many plot lines, which made the ending of the film really bad, because in the next film that Iron Man is in, he's flying around in Iron Man. In Iron Man 3, he blows up all of his suits, and really, they just throw this plot line out the window when going into Age of Ultron, and they have to retcon it later in Civil War with the Russos. And then we move into Thor the Dark World, which is regarded as the worst film inside of the MCU, and I completely agree. In this film, they try to throw so many plot lines out there. They're starting to look for the Reality Stone, the Ether, and that kind of progresses the story of the MCU a little bit forward, but they still didn't know what to do with this Thor character up to this point, and actually the film just comes off being kind of bland. And then we move into the high point of the Phase 2, Captain America the Winter Soldier. This film flips the entire world of the MCU upside down, because S.H.I.E.L.D. is the main thing that brought the Avengers together, and when S.H.I.E.L.D. got destroyed, that created a big risk for the MCU going forward. Speaking of big risk, we also had this film called Guardians of the Galaxy with this quirky director from a company named Trauma that used to make dark films. And then we have a talking tree and a talking raccoon that shoots guns. And then we have a guy that's stuck in the 80s, a green alien, and an alien that talks like a walking thesaurus. Just a weird set of characters that nobody knew. Marvel took a big risk on this, and it worked out for them. Next up, we have Age of Ultron, a film that actually tried to go bigger and tried to go better than the original, and sometimes it was better than the original, and sometimes it did go bigger than the original. But at the end of the day, though I do love this movie, and though it is gonna crack my top 10 MCU movies every time, I can understand the hate for this film, and I can agree that yes, it does have a lot more plot lines than it really needs. We move into Ant-Man, which is not trying to be the biggest summer blockbuster ever. It's just trying to be a fun little movie inside of the MCU, and by its nature, it's inherently small. They introduce new technology that can move the MCU forward, and by itself, it's taking its own risks. This entire phase is actually a bridging point from the origin stories to the big master execution of Phase 3. It's actually trying to lay the groundwork to get to that big epic finale of Phase 3. Rotten Tomatoes has Phase 2 averaged out to 80.83, and I think the best films inside of this phase has got to go to Captain America the Winter Soldier and the Guardians of the Galaxy. Before I get into my number one, I'd like to take the time to say that if you are a fan of Marvel, which you probably are, that's why you're watching this video. Click that playlist up above for everything Marvel related that I have on my channel. Also, if you are a fan of the MCU, I am doing an MCU rewatch on my podcast. It's called The Regular Podcast, and that link is always in the description and in the comment section. And we will be uploading Ant-Man and the Wasp on Monday, and Avengers Infinity War is already out. So without further ado, let's get into my number one. But coming in my number one has gotta go to Phase 3. I think everyone who's an MCU fan can agree that Phase 3 is the best phase. After the success of the first two phases, Phase 1 and Phase 2, Phase 3 got the confidence to plan out this long, more than 10 movie arc that would all interconnect and work towards their Infinity War and Endgame. They also were able to take the most grounded and weirdest properties, make them all interconnected, put them inside of the same universe, and have them work inside of a concise story. By this time, Marvel had already had their big bag of entertainment tricks, so you can see in every film in Phase 3, there's something there to entertain audiences. But one of the big problems about this phase is that you can feel the MCU template inside of most of these movies. Like, you have Doctor Strange, and they just took his origin story and pushed it through the Iron Man template. You have some of the comedy aspects of these films, which some of these films are funny, and I'm not saying that I don't laugh out loud at them. I'm just saying that in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Thor Ragnarok, Spider-Man Far From Home, even Avengers Endgame, some of the comedy undercuts the drama. Yes, you could argue that these films are trying to be comedies, but I just felt like they went too far into comedy, and we really didn't have that much drama aspects about the film. Even though I have many problems with the comedy aspects about about this phase. I do laugh out loud at some of these moments. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I think I laughed the hardest at that movie. Thor Ragnarok, I think that is the funniest MCU movie. We have Spider-Man Homecoming and Far From Home, which are high school movies, which are intentionally supposed to be comedies. But that master plan is what makes Phase 3 special. Up to this point, they are following up their films that came before in the world that they have laid out with these characters, that you can do things like Avengers Infinity War or Avengers Endgame. Usually you can't do things like this in other franchises because there's not enough backstory, or there's not this big of a world that you can do it at this scope. We can talk about Captain America Civil War, a film that wouldn't have worked if we didn't have that background knowledge on Tony and Steve. Marvel waited 8 years into the MCU until Phase 3, 13 movies in, to make this movie because they knew that we had to get emotionally tied to these characters first. Like I said, we spend so much time with Tony and Steve, learning their ideologies, who they're friends with, what are their mistakes. We learn about what their personalities are because we have so much background knowledge on them. That's why the film was able to have so much tension and that you can feel the betrayal as you did, because we know why Steve would do this and why Tony would do this. Another example of this has got to go to Infinity War and Endgame, where I feel that they actually landed the ship perfectly well and gave us a great conclusion to this overall Infinity Saga. But that wouldn't have been possible if they didn't lay out all of their cards in Phase 1 and Phase 2. The reason why Phase 3 is so successful to this day is because Phase 1 and Phase 2 were also very successful. The solo films inside of this phase is also great. Doctor Strange has great visuals in a trippy Inception style world. We also have Black Panther nominated for an Oscar and won. We have all of these distinct flavors and tones that work in a concise story because of Phase 1 and Phase 2. This is why I think Phase 3 is prime MCU, because it has great entertainment and the master plan of the Infinity Saga was finally realized in Endgame. I gotta say, the two best films inside of this phase has gotta go to Infinity War and Endgame, obviously, and Rotten Tomatoes have their score at 89.2. So since Rotten Tomatoes think it's number one, I think it's number one. Everyone else in the comment section might think it's number one also. So it has to come in at number one. Alright guys, that was it for the ranking. Please know that everything that I did say in this video was just my very own opinion. My list was certainly not the right list, it was just my list. And you are free to comment down below your ranking of all 3 MCU phases ranked from the worst to the best, just like me. Or you could just do your favorite. Sorry, I did not include Captain Marvel on some of the stuff that I said inside of Phase 3. That does not mean Captain Marvel is a bad film. That just means I couldn't really find anything to say about it since I have not watched it recently. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.